Hello and welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Yeah, hi Kimberly. Hi everyone. This is George Haymaker. I'm a brain performance coach, and I'm calling in today from Napa, California.
Okay, and before we get into how you became a brain coach, can you go ahead and explain to me your past leading up into what you do as a brain coach, wellness coach?
Yeah, um, certainly. I'm 64 years old, and I have been an entrepreneur for about 3.5 decades of my life. Um, and so I had no intention of going into brain coaching, uh, but there were the path that my life took kind of led me in this direction, and it resulted from growing up with some unhelpful mental patterns starting in childhood. Um,
Okay. Can you tell me about those things if you don't mind?
no, not at all. It's a pleasure. Yeah. So my upbringing was privileged in many ways financially. My dad was a high performing executive, but it was also unsettling in many other ways from a developmental point of view. We moved around a lot, so I was constantly in and out of schools. Um,
Can I ask you a question? Do you think that moving probably contributes to children having dysfunction in their life, like moving a lot around, like with depending on the environment to which you move?
Yeah, because all of us, our brains are looking for safety first and foremost, and so when we're in and out of environments, having to meet new friends, say goodbye to old friends, our brains can interpret that as a threat to our safety because having loving relationships, healthy attachments to our parents and to friends is very important, especially it's important our whole lives, but especially when you're a child and your brain is forming. It's very important to have stability and safety and comfort. And so when you're constantly in and out of environments, it's a very unsettling time, and so the brain can interpret that many different ways. And in my case, it made me very uncomfortable. You know how kids can be in schools when you're the new kid, you can be made
Yeah,
fun of,
yeah.
and and so you get thrown. Uh, your brain has to interpret those environments in any way it can to feel safe, and a lot of times it has trouble doing that. And so that was my situation. I also grew up in a household that was heavy handed on discipline,
Mm.
a lot of physical discipline. And, so there were some other things that happened, some sexual abuse and some other things that happened growing up. And so I was just very uncomfortable in my own skin, struggling for self-esteem. I got angry very quickly. I was highly reactive. And so when I got to college, I found drugs and alcohol and began to cope with those symptoms of anxiety and self-doubt, and other types of mental friction. I began to cope with drugs and alcohol that way. And unfortunately, I have a history of addiction in my family. So when you combine that with the discomfort I was feeling mentally, I was kind of ripe for becoming addicted. And that's what happened.
Did
Um,
you ever reach a comfort zone between the sexual abuse of your offender? I guess it's called a offender, the whoever did the abuse. Did you ever find like an intervention or like peace within that?
um, I did not directly deal with that situation. What seemed to be more prevalent to me was my issues around my parents, my upbringing, because I was really counting on them for attachment because I was in and out of these schools. And when they would discipline me because I was acting up, because I was uncomfortable, um, that made me even more uncomfortable. So that's really the issues that seemed to rise front and center for me was the issues around the attachment to my parents.
So the
Um,
neuroscience that you practice now can do you think that when you because when you move somewhere you're like you said piggyback off of what you just said you're like the new kid and it's like the chemistry like it's like a chemistry thing. Kids have to get to know you, chemical wise. Is that not without drugs, but like the chemistry, the whatever fumes in the air from a person can cause another person possibly to have a reaction to it based on, you know, um, like how a dog can smell you, basically. Do you get like your fear? Does that make any sense?
I think so. So what ends up happening to us is that, we have these mental patterns that are unhelpful. So in my case, I was constantly doubting myself, constantly getting angry,
Mhm.
being very reactive. Um, and so what happens over time is that we continue to engage in those patterns, and neurologically, they reinforce themselves in the brain. Um, they become neural pathways or connections of neurons that, because we stimulate them so often and re-engage in the thoughts, feelings, and actions, they become reinforced patterns in our brain, and that's what the brain ends up predicting over and over again, because we've repeated them so often. And so when we're in similar situations that are uncomfortable, the brain wants to predict the same patterns over and over again, because it's what it knows. It's what we've trained it to do. So the brain is a very trainable organ, and it will keep repeating the same patterns over and over again unless we decide that we want something different. And that's what I help people do, is to retrain the brain in ways that are more helpful to them.
Can you give me an example of how you retrain the brain?
Yeah. So again, these neural patterns, as they develop, these strings of neurons, what happens is every time that they engage, they have neurochemicals and electricity that flows through them and makes them stronger and stronger. And so what we do is we just identify whatever patterns are unhelpful in someone's life, and determine, why those patterns are unhelpful and why they still no longer serve us well. They might have served us at one time trying to be safe and get by, but they're no longer serving us anymore in a way that's helpful later on in our adulthood. And so what we do is we deconstruct those patterns, find out where they originally came from, why they developed in the first place, um, and then do some things, some exercises around loosening the grip that those patterns have on our psyche. And what happens is we can come up with evidence and reasons why those patterns should no longer exist, and it causes them to weaken, or at least open the opportunity for us to consider other patterns to put in their place. And so then what we do is we construct new patterns that we feel are more in alignment with how we want ourselves to be going forward in the rest of our lives. And so then we begin to design what those patterns might look like, the cognitive, emotional, and behavioral components of them. The ones that might be in alignment with the identity that we want for ourselves the rest of our lives. And then we begin to rehearse those patterns. And so really what you're doing, it's very much like going to the gym where, if you've got certain things you want to change about your body, you stop doing the things that are leading to your body being the way it is, and you start doing new things that are going to help, um, direct your body in the direction that you want it to go. And so the brain and the body are very similar in that way. They both react and respond well to repetition, emotional tagging, which means these experiences have to be emotionally oriented, and they have to also create reward in the brain. The brain has to find reasons to want to do them. And so it's really those three elements that help rewire the brain into different ways that are more helpful and in alignment for how we want to lead our lives going forward.
Sort of like when I go to the smoothie shop after working out or something, I reward myself with working out, well, the smoothie, since I worked out. So um that's pretty cool, but it's more to it. You said cognitive, that's the gold standard, that they use, for other things like cognitive behavior therapy and stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, what has to happen is that, um, I mean, what I do, there is some cognitive therapy in it, but the brain won't change unless you repeat these patterns uh,
Oh,
over and over and over again
yeah,
in a way that's emotionally um, relevant and significant,
yeah.
meaning they have a lot of meaning, and then that you attach reward to it. In other words, the brain has to understand that what you're doing is going to pay off down the road. There has to be meaning attached to these changes, but then you have to repeat them over and over and over again, otherwise they won't stick in the brain.
Okay, and tell kind of elaborate more because you said that they won't stick in the brain. You said that they won't stick in the brain. So kind of
Yeah.
elaborate more.
Yeah. So again, all of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, everything that we do in life is made up of, we have 86 billion neurons in our brain. And these
Okay.
and these neurons, the brain cells, that's what really makes up our brains. Um, they all connect to one another in response to every time we think something, feel something, or behave in a certain way. And so these neurons form patterns in our brain or connections. They're like strings of Christmas lights. And
Uh-huh.
remember, there's 85 billion of them.
Wow.
So there's all these different connections in the brain, and they're organized in such a way based on how we think, feel, and behave. And the
Uh-huh.
more times that we think, feel, and behave the same things over and over again, the stronger those connections get. And so, if just by virtue of the fact that they've already connected already based on repetition, if we want,
So what you're saying is there's good neurons and there's bad neurons,
no, the
like
neurons are all fine,
receptors.
but they're all good, but
Okay,
they've
okay.
organized themselves in such a way that, um, to different thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, some of which are helpful in our lives and some of which aren't helpful. Like, let's say that we procrastinate a lot, okay? And we're finding that procrastination is not helping us anymore, right? Because we never get anything done. We're always procrastinating. Well, there are neurons in the brain that aren't good or bad. They've just organized themselves in such a way that represent this procrastination.
Fair
And,
enough.
and because we've procrastinated over and over again, these connections between these neurons that represent the procrastination have gotten stronger and stronger. And so the brain keeps causing us to procrastinate because we've organized these neurons to procrastinate. And so if we want to change and get out of the procrastination habit, we have to stop procrastinating long enough for these neurons that have already attached and that represent this pattern to begin to weaken and want to start breaking apart from each other. So in other words, this procrastination string of neurons begins to weaken and they begin to break apart. Meanwhile, we're building habits around not procrastinating, around um, you know, getting in action and doing things that are in alignment with our values. The fact that we don't want to procrastinate. We want to be in action. We want to take care of our business. It's important to us. It means a lot to us to be productive and be organized and set our priorities and actually do what we say we're going to do. That's deeply meaning to many people. It ties into their values. And so, but what's critical is that you start acting that way. And as you act that way, you're taking these neurons and building new patterns that are reflecting this new way of being. And so the more times that you can practice not procrastinating and being in action, and then by virtue of that, you're not procrastinating, the neurons that represent the procrastination will begin to weaken and break apart. And so that your brain stops going there as a default. And then it starts to then get used to the fact that you are now this new and different way. And so our entire
Do you
mental
have
life is built
clients?
around and
Do you have
represented by these connections of neurons in our brain.
do you
And
have
so, and um, the brain recreates our mental life based on how we've been in the past. And so that's why things keep recurring and regenerating, is because the brain is predicting these old patterns that we keep practicing over and over again, because that's all it knows. But if we start to show it new habits and new ways of being that are more important to us and more helpful to us, then the brain will start to um, connect its neurons related to these new patterns.
okay, okay. And basically, you have to rewire the brain pattern, sort of like smoking. Once you stop smoking, you when you smell it again, you don't want it. Is that what you're saying? Enough time, you said give the neurons enough
Yeah,
time to break down, break
yeah.
down.
So
So you
that's a very
won't keep going to that same spot again in your
yeah.
brain.
So that's a very good example. Smoking. It's a little more complicated because it's
I
addiction.
believe you. I believe you.
It's addiction, but it does have the same. It follows the same pattern. And so, let's say you stop smoking for a while. You have these cravings because you have built these patterns in your brain that basically say every time I feel stressed or every time certain things happen, I need to have a smoke. And so what's happened is these neurons in your brain have connected to each other and gotten very strong over time, because you've developed this habit around every time you have certain cues, like being stressed, you grab a smoke. And so through all that repetition, these neurons have gotten very strong. So now all of a sudden you stop, and for a while, if you smell smoke, you'll get a craving. But over time you start doing different things. When you get stressed, you start doing more healthy things. Maybe you breathe, or you take a walk, or you play with your dog, or you get something healthy to eat. And so now you're starting to create new patterns with new connections of neurons that represent these new ways. And you're starting to get motivated by being healthy and by being in alignment with, not having this habit that you don't like anymore. And so these new neural pathways will develop. And then if you put enough repetitions into those, um, your brain begins to shift away from the old patterns of finding smoking enjoyable, to now it no longer finds them enjoyable, because it's found these new ways of being around not smoking. So it's found more rewarding ways of satisfying itself.
Now, do you have any clients or you just speak on this?
No, no, no. I work with people
Okay,
all the.
tell me about a time where it your first time will let's say your middle time, your time that you did between like now and the present, that you had somebody that was not difficult, but maybe had some things that made you relive your scars.
Well, I don't know if I relive them. I can certainly relate to people that struggle. Let's just
Yeah,
say that. So I
I
feel
can
I feel great
too.
empathy and
Yeah.
compassion towards people that struggle, but I
Hmm.
also feel great hope because I know that the brain can change. And so what happens with people that are struggling is that they don't know what the brain is capable of. They don't know that change is possible. And so that's what I know that it's possible because I've been through it. And so I can relate to what they're going through. I can tell them what the journey is going to look like. I can tell them exactly what to expect. When they have setbacks during the process, I can tell them that that's natural and that's only part of the process. And so, I don't, it doesn't really activate me in any way negatively. It's just allows me to take what I've learned from my education, but as well as what I've learned in my life, to combine the two to really help people because I can relate to what they're going through.
Do you think that this is therapeutic for you doing helping the people that you're helping,
Oh,
helping your, helping yourself too, because we have to help ourselves every day, whether we like it or not, you
yeah,
know.
it's enormously helpful to me. This is what I decided to dedicate the rest of my life to because, um, a few years ago, I was trying to decide what to do next. And as I said, I'm 64. And I asked myself, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And what I've been through, overcoming these mental difficulties and overcoming addiction and learning about my brain and transforming myself and rewiring my brain has been the most important, um, influential moment of my life or series of moments. And so um, that's what I want to do is because it means so much to me. With what I've been through, I want to help other people. It makes me feel good about myself. It satisfies a lot of my internal psychological needs for skillfulness and significance and togetherness with other people. And so it just makes me feel really good. And I know that it's my calling and what I'm meant to do.
Okay, and if you had a piece of advice to give to the young entrepreneur who is, let's say, struggling with anxiety, what would you tell them?
Well, anxiety is a symptom of a deeper mental issue. And so those issues can all be deconstructed, understood. Um, the grip that they have over you can be loosened and new patterns can be built in their place. And so, all by understanding how the brain works. I don't think many of us understand exactly how the brain works and how it constructs our mental life, including anxiety. And so there's always something underlying anxiety that's causing the anxiety itself. And so the brain has a pattern in it that's causing mental friction, which produces the anxiety. And so we can understand what that pattern is and begin to weaken it and put a new pattern in its place that's much more helpful so that you can let go of what it is that's causing you anxiety.
Sort of like when the fear of dogs, a dog bark or bite you, and now you fear the dog, any dog that come by you. Is that correct?
Yeah. So a lot of us have mental discomfort due to past experiences that made us feel threatened or unsafe. And so, what we can do then is take a look at that example and say, okay, when did this feeling about dogs first come up for you? And there's probably a situation or situations in the past where a dog bit somebody or bit you, right? And so then what we would do is try to examine all the time since then that the person has come across a dog and the interaction's been fine.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Okay. And so what happens is over time, we begin, through working through these processes, we begin to loosen the grip that this fear of dogs begins to have over the person, because we recognize that it happened years and years and years ago, and we've had a bunch of other interactions in between that were good, and maybe there's something about dogs now that we want to experience in a positive way because we feel like it might be helpful to us. And so then we could maybe start to have new experiences with dogs that are more rewarding and begin to replace the old long ago pattern that developed that caused us to fear dogs. And so over time we can have new experiences with dogs that are more pleasant and helpful, and then the brain begins to say, well, dogs aren't so bad after all. Look at all the new experiences that I've had. And so the brain begins to predict to us that dogs are no longer to be feared. They're to be enjoyed, and they give us all these other benefits. And so we would put in place some ways of interacting with dogs that allow us to develop these new healthy impressions and experiences around dogs. And then the brain begins to use those experiences as its templates to predict future experiences with dogs instead of the old one that was fearful.
Wow. So you're basically putting another file in the brain, or, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
brain is that's a very good way of saying it. The brain is very much like a big filing cabinet of all of these past experiences. And a lot of times we can have mental discomfort today based on things that happened to us years and years ago. And we just keep interacting the same way with anything that seems to remind us of that bad experience. And so what we want to do is get rid of that file that you just described and put new files in its place.
Yeah, very good. And now we're out of time. So can you
Okay.
tell the people how they can reach you?
Sure. They can find me on LinkedIn at George Haymaker. My name is Haymaker. I also have a website, georgehaymaker.com. I do individual coaching. I do group coaching. I'm launching a new group coaching community called the Brain Club. It's a way to learn about the brain, and then interact with me uh, based on how that information is stimulating things in you that you may want to work on. This stuff really works. The brain is changeable, adaptable, and evolvable. You don't have to stay stuck where you are. You can experience life in whatever way you want.
Yes. And I want to thank you so much, Mr. Haymaker, for joining my show. Stay on the line. Thank you all for watching my show today. Take care, be safe, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.
Never waste my time.